The distinctions themselves are not abstruse, but the fact that the classes they define overlap and interpenetrate makes it difficult to formulate them with the decisive sharpness analytical categories demand. Consociates are individuals who actually meet persons who encounter one another somewhere in the course of daily life. They thus share, however briefly or superficially, not only a community of time but also of space. They are involved in the one another's biography, at least minimally. They grow older together, at least momentarily, interacting directly and personally as egos, subjects themselves. Lovers, so long as love lasts, are consociates, are as are spouses until they separate, or friends until they fall out. So also are members of orchestras, players at games, strangers chatting on a train, hagglers in a market, or inhabitants of a village. Any set of persons who have an immediate face-to-face relationship. It is, however, persons having such relations more or less continuously and to some enduring purpose, rather than merely sporadically or incidentally, who form the heart of the category. The others shade over into being the second sort of fellow men, contemporaries. Contemporaries are persons who share a community of time but not of space. They live at more or less the same period of history and have often very attenuated social relationship with one another, but they do not, at least in the normal course of things, meet. They are linked not by direct social interaction, but through a generalized set of symbolically formulated, that is, cultural, assumptions about each other's typical moves of behavior. Further, the level of generalization involved in is a matter of degree, so that the graduation of personal involvement is consociate relations from lovers through change acquaintances. Relations also culturally governed, of course, here continues until social ties slip off into a thoroughgoing anonymity, standardization, and interchangeability. Thinking of my absent friend A.E., I form an ideal type of his personality and behavior based on my past experience of A. As my consociate putting a letter in a mailbox, I expect that unknown people called postmen will act in a typical way, not quite intelligible to me, with the result that my letter will reach the addressee within typically reasonable time, without ever having met a Frenchman or a German. I understand why French fears the rearmament of Germany. Complying with a rule of English grammar, I follow in my writings a socially approved behavior pattern of contemporary English-speaking fellow men, to which I have to adjust to make myself understandable. And finally, any artifact or utensil refers to the anonymous fellow man who produces it to be used by other anonymous fellow men for attaining typical goals by typical means. These are just a few of the examples, but they are arranged according to the degree of increasing anonymity involved and therewith of the construct needed to grasp the other and his behavior. Finally, predecessors and successors are individuals who do not share even a community of time and so, by definition, cannot interact. And as such, they form something of a single class over against both consociates and contemporaries, who can and do. But from the point of view of any particular actor, they do not have quite the same significance. Predecessors, having already lived, can be known or more accurately known about, and their accomplished acts can have an influence upon the lives of those from whom they are predecessors, that is, their successors, though the reverse is, in the nature of the case, not possible. Successors, on the other hand, cannot be known or even known about, for they are the unborn occupants of an unarrived future, and though their lives can be influenced by the accomplished acts of those whose successors they are, that is, their predecessors, the reverse is again not possible. For empirical purposes, however, it is more useful to formulate these distinctions less strictly also, and to emphasize that, like those settings of consociates from contemporaries, they are relatives and far from clear-cut in everyday experience. With some exceptions, our older consociates and contemporaries do not drop suddenly into the past, but fade more or less gradually into being our predecessors as they age and die, during which period of apprentice ancestorhood we may have some effect upon them, as children so often shape the closing phases of their parents' lives. And our younger consociates and contemporaries grow gradually into becoming our successors, so that those of us who live long enough to often have the dubious privilege of knowing who is to replace us, and even occasionally having some glancing influence upon the redirection of his growth. Consociates, contemporaries, predecessors, and successors are best seen not as pigeonholes into which individuals distribute one another for classificatory purposes, but as indicating certain general and not altogether distinct matter-of-fact relationships which individuals conceive to obtain between themselves and others. But again, these relationships are not perceived purely as such. They are grasped only through the agency of cultural formulations of them. And being culturally formulated, their precise character differs from society to society, as the inventory of available culture patterns differs from situation to situation within a single society, as different patterns among the plurality of those which are available are deemed appropriate for application, and from actor to actor within similar situations, as idiosyncrasy, habits, preferences, and interpretations come into play. There are, at least beyond infancy, no neat social experiences of any importance in human life. Everything is tinged with imposed significance and fellow men. Like social groups, moral obligations, political institutions, or ecological conditions are apprehended only through a stream of significant symbols, which are the vehicles of their objectification, and a screen that is therefore very far from being neutral with respect to their real nature. consociates contemporaries, predecessors, and successors, are as much made as born. Balinese orders of person definition. In Bali, there are 6 sorts of labels which one person can apply to another in order to identify him as a unique individual, and which I want to consider against this general conceptual background. 1. Personal names. 2. Beer other names. 3. Kinship terms. 4. Technonyms. 5. Status titles, usually called caste names, in the literature of Bali, on Bali. And 6. Public titles, by which I mean quasi-occupational titles borne by chiefs, rulers, priests, and gods. These various labels are not, in most cases, employed simultaneously, but alternatively, depending upon the situation and sometimes the individual. There are not also all the sorts of such labels ever used, but they are the only ones which are generally recognized and regularly applied. And as each sort consists not of a mere collection of useful tags, but of a distinct and bounded terminological system, I shall refer to them as symbolic orders of person definition, and consider them first serially, only later as a more or less coherent cluster. Personal names. The symbolic order defined by personal names is the simplest to describe, because it is in formal terms the least complex, and in social ones is the least important. All Balinese have personal names, but they rarely use them, either to refer to themselves or others, or in addressing anyone. With respect to one's forebears, including one's parents, it is in fact sacrilegious to use them. Children are more often referred to, and on occasion even addressed by, their personal names. Such names are therefore sometimes called child or little names, though once they are ritually bestowed 105 days after birth, they are maintained unchanged through the whole course of a man's life. In general, personal names are seldom heard and play very little public role. Yet, despite this social marginality, the personal naming system has some characteristic which, in a rather left-handed way, are extremely significant for an understanding of Balinese ideas of personhood. First, personal names are, at least among the commoners, some 90% of the population, arbitrarily coined nonsense syllables. They are not drawn from any established pool of names, which might lend to them any secondary significance as being common or unusual, as reflecting someone's being named after someone, an ancestor, a friend of the patterns of the parents, a famous personage, or as being propitious, suitable, characteristic of a group of religion, indicating a kinship relation, and so forth. Second, the duplication of personal names within a single community, that is, a politically unified, nucleated settlement, is studiously avoided. Such a settlement, called a banjar or hamlet, is the primary face-to-face group outside the purely domestic realm of the family, and in some respects is even more intimate, usually highly endogamous, and always highly corporate. The hamlet is the Balinese world of consociates par excellence, and within it, every person possesses, however, unstressed of the social level, at least the rudiments of a completely unique cultural identity. Third, personal names are monomials, and so do not indicate familial connections or in fact membership in any sort of group whatsoever. And finally, there are a few rare, and in any case only partial, exceptions aside, no nicknames, no epithets of the Richard the Lion-Hearted or Ivan the Terrible soar among the nobility, not even any diminuties for children or pet names for lovers, spouses, and so on. Thus, whatever role the symbolic order of person definition marked out by the personal naming system plays in setting Balinese off from one another or in ordering Balinese social relations is essentially residual in nature. One's name is what remains to one when all the other socially much more salient cultural labels attached to one person are removed. As the virtually religious avoidance of its direct use indicates, a personal name is a intensely private matter. Indeed, toward the end of a man's life, when he is but a step away from being the deity he will become after his death and cremation, only he and few equally aged friends may any longer know what in fact it is. When he disappears, it disappears with him. In the well-lit world of everyday life, the purely personal part of an individual's cultural definition, that which in the context of the immediate consociate community is most fully and completely his, and his alone, is highly muted. And with it are muted the more idiosyncratic, merely biographical, and consequently transient aspects of his existence as a human being. What in our more egoistic framework we call his personality, in favor of some rather more typical, highly conventionalized, and consequently enduring ones. Beard order names. The most elementary of such more standardized labels are those automatically bestowed upon a child, even a stillborn one, at the instant of its birth, according to whether it is the first, second, third, fourth, etc. member of a sibling set. There is some local and status group variation in usage here, but the most common system is to use Wayan for the first child, Nyoman for the second, Made or Nenga for the third, and Kitut for the fourth, beginning the cycle over again with Wayan for the fifth, Nyoman for the sixth, and so on. These bird order names are the most frequently used terms of both address and reference within the hamlet for children and for young men and women who have not yet produced offspring. Vocatively, they are almost always used simply, that is, without the addition of the personal name. Wayan, give me the hoe, and so forth. Referentially, they may be supplemented by the personal name, especially when no other way is convenient to get across which of the dozens of Wyans and Newmans in the hamlet is meant. No, not Wyan Rugrud, Wyan Kepig, and so on. Parent address their own children and childless siblings address one another almost exclusively by these names, rather than by either personal names or kin terms. For persons who have had children, however, they are never used either inside the family or out, technonyms being employed as we shall see instead, so that in cultural terms, Balinese who grow to maturity without producing children, a small minority, remain themselves children, that is, are symbolically pictured as such, a fact commonly of great shame to them and embarrassment to their consociates, who often attempt to avoid having to use vocatives to them altogether.